They said no pilot could fly a B-25 like this. No crew could survive missions this suicidal, and no bomber could sink 12 Japanese ships in just 3 days. But in the spring of 1944, one impossible plane rewrote the rules of aerial warfare, and the enemy never saw it coming. In the early years of the Pacific War, few pilots embodied unconventional thinking more completely than Major Paul Irving, Pappy Gunn, a former naval aviator. Airline captain and master mechanic, Gunn entered World War II with an approach to aviation that defied traditional military structures. He had no patience for rigid doctrine, no faith in slow-moving bureaucracy, and little interest in doing things the way they had always been done. What he trusted was engineering, experience, and an instinct honed from decades of flying in harsh, unforgiving conditions across the Pacific. Born in 1899 in Quitman, Arkansas, Gunn had worked in nearly every role an aircraft required: pilot, engineer, and even field repairman. Before the war, he had lived in the Philippines, operating civilian aircraft for Philippine Airlines and using improvisation as a daily necessity in remote islands. When the Japanese attacked in December 1941, he joined U.S. forces not as a theorist, but as a man intimately familiar with what an aircraft could be pushed to do. It was this background, rather than formal design training, that shaped his most radical idea, transforming the North American B-25 Mitchell into a low-altitude, heavily armed ship-killing machine. At that time, U.S. bomber doctrine dictated medium-altitude bombing runs against shipping targets. But early Pacific campaigns exposed the weakness of this approach. Bombers dropping ordnance from several thousand feet often missed fast-moving vessels. Japanese convoys, reinforced with anti-aircraft guns and protected by fighter cover, exploited the Americans' predictable attack profiles. Losses increased, but results did not. Gunn saw the problem clearly. The B-25 needed to fight at the altitude where accuracy mattered most, the surface of the sea. His proposal was simple in concept, but revolutionary in execution. He envisioned ripping out the standard bombardier nose, installing multiple forward-firing .50 caliber machine guns, and flying the B-25 at wave-top height in a fast, direct attack run. It was almost the opposite of how the aircraft had been designed. To senior commanders, it was a reckless idea. To many engineers, it was an unnecessary modification that violated the performance balance of the airframe. And to crews assigned to fly such a machine, the thought of diving headlong into anti-aircraft fire at 100 feet above the ocean sounded like near suicide. But Gunn's approach was shaped by necessity, not theory. He had already seen how the Japanese Navy used speed, maneuverability, and coordinated gunnery to protect their supply lines. He knew that medium-altitude bombing would never cripple a well-defended convoy. What America needed in the Pacific was a strike aircraft that could smash through a defensive screen and deliver devastating, accurate fire at point-blank range. Gunn began experimenting with forward-firing armament using salvaged parts and available guns at airfields in Australia. Working with local maintenance crews and sympathetic officers, he personally supervised and often physically performed modifications that turned standard B-25CS into the earliest versions of the Strafer model. His reputation grew not because of rank, but because of results. Aircraft returned from missions showing that concentrated forward gunfire could silence shipboard defenses long enough for bombs or skip bombing runs to strike effectively. Higher headquarters remained divided. Some officers believed the modifications compromised safety and wasted valuable resources. Others argued that the Pacific Theater needed standardized equipment, not improvised conversions built in field workshops. But Gunn's work gained support from frontline pilots who saw the immediate effect on enemy shipping. Each test flight demonstrated that low-altitude strafing combined with aggressive tactics could overwhelm even well-armed Japanese transports. What set Gunn apart was his refusal to accept limitation from the aircraft, from command structures or from wartime convention. When supply shortages slowed his progress, he scavenged parts from wrecked aircraft. When engineers protested weight imbalances, he he proved stability through live flight tests. And when skeptics insisted that a B-25 could not carry the volume of forward-firing guns he proposed, he simply installed them and flew the aircraft himself. By 1943, his innovations led directly to the development of the B-25G and later the B-25H factory-produced variants incorporating heavy nose armament, including a 75 mm cannon. But before these standardized models existed, the decisive leap had already been taken in improvised workshops fueled by Gunn's determination. His field-built strafers would soon demonstrate their worth in some of the most destructive anti-shipping missions of the Pacific War. The moment that defined his resolve came early in the project, when objections from senior officers nearly halted his work entirely. Gunn responded not with debate, but with action. Standing among half-modified airframes, improvised tools, and the crews who trusted him, he made the decision that shaped the next phase of the war. We'll build it ourselves, transforming the B-25. Mitchell into a low-altitude ship killer began as an improvised experiment carried out far from official engineering centers. In 1942 and 1940, American forces operating from Australia faced a simple problem with no simple solution. Japanese convoys were moving supplies through narrow island chains protected by concentrated anti-aircraft fire. Medium-altitude bombing proved ineffective, and early skip bombing tactics needed a platform capable of delivering overwhelming gunfire at close range. Major Paul Pappy Gunn believed the B-25 could fill that role, but doing so required pushing the aircraft well beyond the limits envisioned by its designers. The first engineering challenge was armament. The standard B-25 had a glass nose containing a bombardier and limited forward-firing guns. Gunn removed the bombardier, positioned entirely, replacing the nose with metal plates and mounts for multiple .50 caliber machine guns. Early conversions installed 4 guns, then 6, and eventually 8 directed straight ahead. Field crews scavenged guns, ammunition feeds, electrical triggers, and support brackets from wrecked aircraft or damaged planes awaiting overhaul. Weight distribution became a constant concern. Each added gun shifted the aircraft's center of gravity forward, requiring reinforcement and careful trimming. Engineers trained in conventional airframe balance criticized the modifications as unsafe. But Gunn's teams relied on repeated test flights to validate each incremental change. Armor posed the second major issue. To maintain speed at low altitude, the aircraft needed to shed weight. Gunn removed sections of armor plating originally intended to protect the bombardier and parts of the fuselage. This left the aircraft more vulnerable to ground fire. But the trade-off increased acceleration and maneuverability qualities essential for wave-top attack runs. Some crews were uneasy about flying with reduced protection, but the tactical logic was clear. Survival depended on speed and surprise rather than passive defense. Engine performance formed the third pillar of the transformation. Low-altitude strafing. Missions required rapid power response, especially during pull-out phases when the aircraft skimmed mere meters above the sea. Mechanics adjusted fuel-air mixtures, tweaked supercharger settings, and optimized propeller pitch to deliver maximum thrust in short bursts. These modifications did not follow standard procedures and occasionally pushed the twin right. R2600 engines close to overheating, but they provided the responsiveness needed for extremely low flight profiles. The B-25, originally a medium bomber, was being reshaped into an attack aircraft. With structural armor and engine modifications underway, the final challenge was tactical planning. Traditional doctrine emphasized medium-altitude bombing accuracy, but Gunn advocated approaches at 60 to 100 feet above the water. Crews practiced flying along coastlines and riverbeds, learning to avoid obstacles while maintaining steady firing lines. Pilots accustomed to level bombing routines found the new tactics unsettling. The roar of engines at low altitude, combined with the violent recoil of heavy machine guns, created a physical strain far more intense than typical bombing missions. Discussions in crew tents reflected genuine concern. Some believed the aircraft would be too heavy to pull out of a run. Others worried that nose-mounted guns would jam or misfire under combat conditions. Yet the shared sense of necessity gradually forged unity. For every crew member voicing doubts, another pointed to the failures of existing tactics. Airmen responsible for the modifications, welders, electricians, mechanics took pride in watching their improvised designs evolve into functional combat systems. They knew the risks, but they also understood the stakes of the Pacific Campaign. As the aircraft took shape, confidence replaced hesitation. By mid-1943, the first fully modified B-25 strafer prototype stood on an Australian airstrip. Its profile differed sharply from factory models. The nose, once transparent, was now a block of metal bristling with machine guns. Armor was reduced, the engines tuned for aggressive maneuvering, and ammunition boxes lined the fuselage interior. It lacked the sleek appearance of traditional bombers, looking instead like a rugged, hastily built weapon. To those who understood its purpose, however, the transformation was unmistakable. It was an ugly but deadly gunship, an aircraft created outside official channels, shaped by battlefield necessity, and ready to test a new era of low-altitude tactics in the Pacific War. By 1944, the Pacific War had entered a phase defined by relentless movement and tightening supply chains. Japan's empire stretched across thousands of miles, but its ability to sustain distant garrisons depended on merchant convoys threading through narrow sea corridors from the East Indies and Southeast Asia. These routes carried oil, ammunition, food, and replacement troops. As American submarines increased their presence, Japanese losses mounted, forcing convoys to consolidate and rely heavily on destroyers and escorts equipped with increasingly dense anti-aircraft armament. Every shipment became a calculated gamble, and every attack on those lifelines carried consequences that rippled across the Pacific battlefront. At the same time, American strategy was accelerating. Under the island-hopping campaign led by Admiral Chester Nimitz and General Douglas MacArthur, the United States advanced through the Marshall Islands, New Guinea, and the Solomons, establishing airfields from which medium and heavy bombers could push deeper into contested territory. Each captured airstrip shortened the distance to Japan's shipping lanes. The 5th Air Force, operating primarily from Australia and New Guinea, played a central role by striking supply convoys and isolating Japanese bases before ground assaults began. Air power was no longer merely supportive, it was shaping the tempo and direction of the entire campaign. Yet the risks were immense. Japanese anti-aircraft defenses, once scattered, had grown formidable by 1944. Convoys often traveled close to shore batteries or under the protection of warships carrying dual-purpose guns capable of creating lethal fire patterns at multiple altitudes. Medium-altitude bombers faced layers of flak, while low-flying aircraft risked concentrated machine gun and cannon fire. Losses among Allied aircrews illustrated the danger. A single mistake, a missed approach, or an incorrect altitude could end a mission in seconds. It was into this environment that Major Paul Pappy, Gunn's modified B-25 gunship, an experimental design born from necessity, was assigned its first combat unit. The squadron selected for these missions consisted of experienced crews from the 345th Bomb Group, also known as the Air Apaches, an outfit already familiar with low-altitude strikes and skip bombing techniques. Although they respected Gunn's experience and reputation, many approached the new aircraft with measured skepticism. The gunship's improvised appearance, stripped armor, and heavy forward armament challenged conventional expectations of stability and safety. Pilots questioned whether the aircraft could sustain the stress of combat maneuvers at low altitude, and gunners wondered how maintenance crews would keep the complex nose-mounted system functional under battle conditions. Curiosity matched uncertainty. Crews inspected the reinforced mounts, the ammunition feeds, and the altered aerodynamic profile. Mechanics explained the tuned engines and weight adjustments made to compensate for the forward guns. Some airmen saw potential. The idea of overwhelming a ship's defenses with concentrated firepower aligned with their experiences in the Pacific. where speed and aggression often determined survival. Others worried that flying so low would expose the aircraft to near horizontal fire from every escort vessel in a convoy. As preparations continued, tension grew across the airfield. Intelligence reports indicated a Japanese convoy moving along a vulnerable stretch of coastline, protected by destroyers and patrol craft. It was the kind of target that could validate or disprove the entire gunship concept. The mission briefing emphasized the importance of speed, precision, and coordination. For the first time, Gunn's modified B-25 would be placed in the same formation as standard strafers and skip bombers, operating as part of a coordinated assault. When the sun rose over the airstrip, engines thundered to life. Dust rolled across the field as the aircraft taxied forward, the modified B-25 positioned among them, its nose guns glinting in the early light. The squadron lifted into the sky, heading toward a hostile coastline and the first true test of an aircraft ready to challenge every assumption of aerial warfare in the Pacific. The first operational test of the modified B-25 gunship came against a Japanese convoy moving along the northern coast of New Britain, an area long considered one of the most dangerous anti-shipping zones in the Southwest Pacific. The convoy consisted of transports escorted by anti-aircraft equipped vessels, accustomed to repelling medium-altitude bombing runs. What they had never faced was a bomber redesigned to strike at the surface of the sea. As the squadron descended toward the coastline, the gunship dropped below 200 feet, merging into the contour of the water. Conventional doctrine discouraged such low-altitude approaches, but the entire concept behind Gunn's aircraft demanded it. Waves blurred beneath the fuselage as the pilots leveled into attack position. The roar of the tuned engines filled the cockpit, and the airframe trembled under the strain of the rapid descent. Ahead, the convoy's gunners reacted quickly. Tracer fire arced upward from multiple points along the formation. Experienced air crews recognized the patterns, layered machine gun fire designed to trap low-flying attackers. Water erupted in white plumes as rounds struck just ahead of the aircraft, sending spray across the windshield. The danger was immediate. Even a single hit to the wing or engine could force a ditching in hostile waters. As the B-25 crossed the final distance, the nose-mounted guns opened fire for the first time in combat. The effect was instantaneous. The concentrated stream of .50 caliber rounds cut a path directly into the nearest escort vessel. Japanese gunners, accustomed to bombers approaching from altitude, had only seconds to adjust to an aircraft speeding toward them at wave-top height. The sudden appearance of continuous forward-firing gunfire disrupted their defensive rhythm. Several gun positions fell silent as crews took cover or shifted aim in confusion. The recoil of 8 heavy machine guns rattled the entire aircraft. Shell casings streamed past the fuselage and scattered across the water below. Inside the cockpit, every vibration communicated the strain placed on the modified nose and reinforced mounts. The crew felt the physical impact of the guns in a way entirely different from standard strafing aircraft. Adrenaline surged as they pushed the plane through the incoming fire. The escort vessel attempted evasive maneuvers, but the low-altitude approach narrowed the attack geometry. At such close range, the forward guns suppressed nearly every visible defensive position. As the B-25 swept past the ship's bow, a skip bomb released from a supporting aircraft struck the vessel. The combination of strafing fire and bomb damage proved decisive. Within minutes, the escort began listing, smoke rising from multiple points on the deck. The gunship regrouped with the formation and climbed to a safer altitude. Only then did the crew fully register what had occurred. The aircraft had survived a direct run through concentrated anti-aircraft fire, delivered continuous forward gunfire without structural failure, and contributed to the destruction of a Japanese warship, relief mixed with disbelief. For months, questions had surrounded the aircraft's viability: weight balance, engine strain, recoil, survivability. Now they had evidence. When the squadron returned to base, ground personnel gathered around the modified B-25, examining the nose, engines, and gun mounts. Despite minor damage from near misses, the aircraft remained fully operational. The mission report confirmed the outcome. The gunship had played a central role in sinking its first target. The once improvised design had proven its combat value on the very first day. The second day of combat operations began before sunrise, with crews still carrying the fatigue of the previous mission. After the gunship's debut, Japanese commanders responded quickly. Radio intercepts and reconnaissance flights confirmed that convoys now traveled under tighter formations, their escorts positioned to generate overlapping anti-aircraft patterns. The change was evident even before the squadron reached its target area. Smoke from camouflage patrol craft drifted upward in the distance, marking an organized defensive screen. As the formation descended, the scale of the challenge became clear. Anti-aircraft fire erupted earlier and in greater density than the day before. Tracers crossed in horizontal grids, attempting to force the attackers into predictable routes. The modified B-25, flying low, by design, entered a zone where every maneuver had to be executed at high speed and minimal altitude. Spray kicked up from the water as shells detonated close to the fuselage, creating a corridor of explosions the aircraft had to punch through. Strafing runs began immediately. The gunship's nose armament delivered sustained bursts into the escorts, guarding the convoy's perimeter. The effect of 8 forward fire and .50 caliber guns was visible through the smoke. Weapon pits fell silent. Gunners shifted positions, and several vessels attempted abrupt course changes to disrupt attack geometry. Meanwhile, supporting B-25s executed skip-bombing runs, releasing ordnance that ricocheted across the surface before striking hulls at the waterline. Throughout the attack, the sea around the formation remained obscured by smoke and debris. Burning fuel created patches of black water, while damaged transports released steam and splintered cargo. The visibility shift forced pilots to rely on instinct and experience rather than clear visual markers. It was in this chaos that the modified B-25 sustained a near-fatal hit. An explosive burst struck the right engine's nacelle, causing an immediate vibration that shook the entire airframe. Engine temperature spiked, and oil loss was visible along the wing. Despite the damage, the aircraft remained in formation for the remainder of the attack run. The danger of breaking away over hostile water outweighed the risks of staying engaged. With gunners continuing to suppress enemy fire, the pilot adjusted power settings to stabilize the aircraft long enough to complete the strike. Inside the fuselage, one crew member injured by shrapnel from the explosion remained at his post. Injuries of this nature were common in low-altitude operations, and standard procedure dictated continued duty unless incapacitation threatened the aircraft's operation. In this case, the crew maintained full combat function. As the attack progressed, additional Japanese ships were hit. Skip bombs detonated against transport hulls, and strafing fire disabled several defensive mounts. The cumulative effect forced the convoy into disarray. Within minutes, at least 2 vessels were engulfed in flames, and several others were dead in the water. The modified B-25, despite engine damage, completed a final pass before climbing to a safer altitude. The return flight tested the aircraft's limits. With one engine running hot and the other carrying increased load, the crew nursed the aircraft across open water until friendly coastline appeared. Upon landing, mechanics immediately assessed the damage, noting how close the engine had come to failing entirely. When commanders reviewed the mission reports, they confronted results that exceeded expectations. Despite heavier defenses and intensified resistance, the squadron had inflicted severe losses. The experimental gunship, even after sustaining major damage, had again proven its value. The outcome left leadership both impressed and surprised by the scale of destruction achieved in only 2 days. The third day of operations began with intelligence indicating the presence of the largest Japanese convoy yet detected along that stretch of coastline. Radio intercepts confirmed multiple transports accompanied by destroyers, sub-chasers, and armed trawlers moving through a narrow channel where steep cliffs met the sea. It was a route chosen for its defensive advantages, limiting attack angles and funneling aircraft into predictable approaches. For the modified B-25 and the crews supporting it, The challenge would be greater than anything encountered during the previous two missions. As the formation descended toward the coastline, the terrain forced the aircraft into a series of sweeping turns along the cliffs. Strong coastal winds blew spray upward, coating the windscreens as the pilots maneuvered at low altitude. The gunship, already bearing scars from the previous day, accelerated into the attack run with engines pushed near their mechanical limits. Airframe vibrations increased as power settings reached levels few crews would have attempted under normal circumstances. Below, the convoy reacted with coordinated discipline. Anti-aircraft batteries opened fire in thick, intersecting arcs designed to block head-on approaches. The modified B-25 responded with its defining advantage, concentrated forward-firing power. Sustained bursts from the nose guns suppressed multiple weapon positions, allowing the formation to break through the initial defensive curtain. Supporting aircraft executed skip bombing runs, releasing ordnance that struck the water before ricocheting into hulls. The confined geography produced a series of rapid chase sequences as the convoy attempted to maneuver along the channel. Smoke from burning vessels merged with mist rising from the sea, obscuring visibility. Pilots inside the formation called out hazards while adjusting altitude to avoid both cliff faces and water spray. Inside the gunship, crew members relayed target bearings over the roar of engines, continuous gunfire, a standard operational necessity during low-level strikes where visibility changed by the second. During one attack pass, the modified B-25 flew so close to the water that its wake trailed behind it. The aircraft's structural limits were tested as it pulled upward to clear a rising section of coastline, engines straining while the nose guns maintained fire on an escort attempting to shield a damaged transport. The forward fuselage shuddered from recoil, but the attack suppressed the escort long enough for a supporting bomb to strike the transport directly. As the battle continued, multiple Japanese ships were hit in quick succession. Fires spread along decks, and several vessels came to a halt, listing heavily. The cumulative effect of 3 days of concentrated attack became unmistakable. By the time the formation withdrew, the convoy had been shattered. The modified B-25's final runs helped destroy the last operational ships, completing a sequence of anti-shipping successes that frontline crews later regarded as extraordinary. When the squadron returned to base, mission totals confirmed the impact. Across 3 consecutive days, the combined strafing and bombing operations had eliminated 12 enemy vessels, an outcome few. Planners had predicted when the modified gunship first appeared on the flight line. The destruction of 12 ships across 3 days created effects that extended far beyond the wreckage left along the New Guinea and New Britain coastlines. Japanese operational records from the period, including reports from the 8th Area Army and surviving convoy logs, reveal a rapid shift in perception regarding American low-altitude strike aircraft. The B-25, already known as a versatile medium bomber, began to acquire a reputation that exceeded its technical specifications. Among Japanese sailors, the modified forward gun variants encountered in the Southwest Pacific were increasingly described with terms that reflected shock and disbelief. Aircraft that appeared suddenly, attacked with overwhelming force, and vanished at sea-skimming height before defensive batteries could re-establish coordination. The psychological effect stemmed from tactics rather than mystique. Japanese convoys had long relied on assumptions formed from early war patterns. American bombers would approach from medium altitude, providing predictable engagement windows. Gunn's modified gunships shattered those expectations. The low, fast strafing attacks appeared almost without warning, followed by skip bomb impacts at the waterline, an approach that weapon crews struggled to counter. Reports from damaged convoys used phrases such as unexpected, intense forward fire, and continuous attack, reflecting both tactical surprise and the sense that the aircraft could deliver firepower disproportionate to its size. Among Japanese sailors, the gun-heavy B-25 variants gained a reputation as Oni Sentoki, loosely translated as demon attackers or demon gunships. a reflection of how quickly they neutralized deck gunners and escort positions. Though not an official designation, the phrasing appeared in post-war interviews and intelligence analyses, illustrating the fear the aircraft generated in frontline units. Convoys altered routes to avoid narrow passages where low-altitude approaches were most effective. Some movements shifted to nighttime schedules, despite the navigational risks, in an effort to reduce exposure to strafing attacks. For the U.S. 5th Air Force, the morale shift was equally significant. Crews who had endured months of high-risk missions with limited results now saw a direct relationship between tactical innovation and operational success. The destruction of multiple convoys reinforced confidence in low-level attack doctrine. Intelligence summaries circulated among the air crews emphasized the psychological disruption the attacks had caused, noting increased evasive behavior and fragmented defensive coordination among Japanese escorts. This validated the belief that suppressive gunfire at the outset of an attack run could determine the outcome of the entire engagement. Maintenance and ground crews felt the impact as well. Aircraft that returned bearing flak damage yet remained operational underscored the resilience of the modified platforms. Confidence grew not only in the weapon configuration, but also in the teams responsible for sustaining them. The success reinforced a collective understanding that innovation in the field, once viewed skeptically by higher command, had reshaped the air war in the region. By mid-1944. The psychological dimensions of these missions had become as influential as the physical losses inflicted. Japanese convoys advanced with heightened caution, while American pilots launched with renewed determination. The Demon gunship, born from improvised modifications, had altered not just tactics but the mindset of both sides engaged in the struggle for control of the Pacific's critical supply lanes. Behind the success of the modified B-25 gunships lay a reality familiar to every aircrew operating in the Southwest Pacific. Victory never came without cost. The low-altitude missions that crippled Japanese convoys also produced some of the highest stress levels of any air operations in World War II. Pilots and gunners flying a few meters above the ocean, directly into concentrated fire, faced the constant possibility of catastrophic damage. Reports from the 345th Bomb Group document frequent injuries caused by shrapnel, flying debris, and the violent recoil of nose-mounted guns. Even minor wounds were common, and many airmen returned to duty immediately, driven by necessity rather than formal recovery. Mechanical failures added another layer of danger. Engines strained to their limits during high-speed approaches, often operating above recommended power settings. Field maintenance logs show recurring issues with overheating, cracked mounts, ammunition feed jams, and structural stress around the modified gun platforms. A failure at low altitude left little margin for recovery. Crews understood that any malfunction over open water or enemy territory could mean ditching in areas where rescue was uncertain. The psychological burden grew with each mission. The 5th Air Force conducted repeated low-level strikes in 1943 and 1944, and many airmen later describe the nights between operations as the hardest part of the campaign. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by memories of anti-aircraft bursts exploding within arm's reach, or the sight of damaged aircraft failing to return. Before each launch, crews stood beside their bombers in silence, aware that previous success offered no guarantee of survival. Post-war interviews and medical assessments illustrate symptoms now recognized as combat stress, hypervigilance, recurring nightmares, and difficulty readjusting during periods of rest. Families back home experienced their own version of the struggle. Letters from the Pacific often blended reassurance with subtle acknowledgments of danger. Airmen avoided specifics due to censorship, writing instead about weather, daily routines, or the camaraderie among crews. Occasionally, a brief reference to a damaged plane or a friend lost in combat hinted at the realities they chose not to describe in detail. For families reading these letters, the uncertainty was constant. Mail delays lasted weeks, and each gap in correspondence carried fears of the worst. Within the squadrons, pilots and gunners reflected privately on the risks of their missions. Some kept journals noting the tension felt before attacks or the relief of landing after, surviving another run. Others expressed gratitude for the ground crews who kept damaged aircraft flying, recognizing that survival depended as much on those working in the shadows as on those facing fire directly. The legend of the impossible gunship grew from battlefield achievements, but the bravery behind it was measured in more than destroyed ships. It was found in the determination of exhausted crews who continued launching into danger, the discipline of mechanics repairing aircraft under pressure, and the resilience of families waiting for news from distant islands. The cost was high, but it was borne by those who believed the outcome of the war depended on their ability to endure. The emergence of the modified B-25 gunship marked a turning point in the evolution of anti-shipping warfare in the Pacific. Before these field-built conversions appeared, air attacks against convoys relied primarily on medium-altitude bombing, a method that produced inconsistent results against moving naval targets. The low-altitude strafing and skip bombing combinations pioneered by Major Paul Pappy Gunn and the U.S. Fifth Air Force demonstrated that speed, precision, and suppressive fire were far more effective than traditional patterns. After the success of the early missions, low-level tactics became standard across multiple Pacific units. Training manuals and after-action analyses incorporated lessons from these operations, emphasizing the importance of neutralizing defensive gun crews before bomb release. The B-25's transformation also reshaped aerial gunnery doctrine. Prior to these innovations, forward-firing armament on medium bombers was limited. Gunn's integration of 6 to 8.50 caliber guns in the nose provided unprecedented concentrated firepower, allowing crews to overwhelm target vessels at close range. This approach influenced later factory-produced variants of the B-25, including the G and H models, which carried heavy nose batteries and, in some cases, a 75 mm cannon. The concept of mounting significant forward-facing armament on multi-engine aircraft spread rapidly, informing the tactics of the 38th, 345th, and 3rd Bomb Groups during campaigns in New Guinea, the Bismarck Sea, and the Philippines. The broader legacy extended well beyond World War II. The idea of a heavily armed aircraft delivering sustained, directional firepower became foundational to post-war gunship development. In the 1960s, the S-47 Spooky gunship adapted this principle for close air support, using side-firing weapons to provide continuous fire on ground targets. The later AC-130 gunships, with integrated sensors, heavy cannons, and specialized munitions, carried the philosophy even further: precision, overwhelming firepower, and adaptability. Military historians routinely identify Gunn's modifications as an early demonstration of how unconventional field engineering can influence long-term doctrinal evolution. Historians continue to study these missions because they reveal how tactical innovation emerges under pressure. The field modifications in Australia and New Guinea illustrate the intersection of necessity, ingenuity, and frontline experience. They also highlight the distinct nature of the Southwest Pacific Theater: long supply lines, rapidly shifting operational zones, and the constant need to improvise with limited resources. Scholars examining the campaign often cite the modified B-25s as evidence of how the Fifth Air Force adapted more quickly than Japanese convoy planners could react. As for reflections from the man behind the concept, Paul Pappy Gunn rarely wrote about his work in dramatic terms. Surviving interviews and accounts describe a pragmatic engineer who viewed the modifications not as visionary design, but as a practical answer to a tactical problem. He expressed satisfaction that the changes improved survival odds for air crews and increased pressure on Japanese shipping. His legacy, shaped not by grand statements but by results achieved under fire, remains a testament to how innovation at the edge of the battlefield can alter the course of an entire campaign. In the later stages of the Pacific War, Major Paul Pappy Gunn continued to influence frontline operations, remaining deeply involved in aircraft modification, tactical planning, and combat missions. His work expanded beyond the B-25, contributing to efforts that improved the lethality and survivability of multiple platforms used by the 5th Air Force, even as standardized factory models began incorporating many of the innovations he pioneered. Gunn persisted in refining field modifications to meet the rapidly shifting demands of the new Guinea and Philippine campaigns. As Allied forces advanced northward, many of the crews who flew the earliest modified B-25s participated in operations that severed Japan's remaining supply routes. Their experience in low-altitude attacks proved invaluable during strikes on Mindanao, Lingayen, Gulf, and shipping lanes near Formosa. By 1945, the cumulative effects of these missions were unmistakable. Japanese convoys had been reduced to isolated, vulnerable movements, and the once formidable shipping network that sustained the empire was effectively broken. For the men who flew these dangerous missions, the war's end came with a mixture of relief and reflection. Many returned home carrying the psychological weight of years spent flying at wave-top height under hostile fire. Others remained in the Pacific as part of reconstruction and demobilization efforts. Their aircraft, once considered improvised and unconventional, transitioned into symbols of frontline ingenuity. Post-war reports from the 5th Air Force highlighted the significance of the modified B-25s in shifting the balance of anti-shipping warfare, and military historians later credited the program with demonstrating how field-engineered solutions could alter strategic outcomes. Pappy Gunn did not witness the full extent of his legacy. In October 1957, he died in a civilian aircraft accident while returning from a business trip in the Philippines. By then, his wartime innovations had already become an integral part of aviation history. Air crews who served under him recognized his impact not through formal titles, but through the survival of men and missions that benefited from his unconventional approach to combat engineering. As decades passed, the impossible plane gained legendary status. Museums, military studies, and historical documentaries often cite the modified B-25s as examples of how necessity drives invention in war. Their story illustrates that technological breakthroughs rarely emerge solely from laboratories or command centers. More often, they originate in improvised workshops at forward airstrips, shaped by men who understand the realities of combat better than any blueprint. Sometimes, history turns not on technology, but on the courage of a few men who refuse to believe the word impossible. Subscribe for more untold stories of courage, innovation, and the forgotten heroes who changed the course of war.